Classic rights debates topics can seem very challenging because it's quite vague on first glance. It certainly is very principled and there is no specific policy that is being proposed. So there's no real benefits or harms that you can immediately discern when you are arguing in favor or against a motion. But even if this is the case, this doesn't mean that you have to be super theoretical at all. Nor do you have to forego a lot of the skills that you probably might already have, like framing or characterization. Instead, when we are debating whether a right should exist or not, we are simply asking a version of the following two questions. Do we have a duty to acknowledge this? And should states acknowledge this? Note that I'm being very careful to phrase these as two separate questions, because rights are not merely about laws to help X or Y, but rights are innate. They are necessarily inalienable and absolute. And furthermore, they constitute obligations and duties that we may have or that we should have. And since states facilitate the legal acknowledgement and protection of these rights, then it is primarily a discussion of whether we first have these obligations to others, and secondarily a question on whether states ought to do this or not. So let's go over a couple of motions and just workshop them for this video. First, this House believes in the right to offend religion. This is a good classic debate because it positions two fundamental rights against one another: the right to freedom of speech and the right to religious freedom. Of course, these two rights on their own are inalienable, yet there are instances when they conflict with one another, when the freedom of speech may infringe on the ability of others to practice their religion, especially in public spaces. So if you were to ask the question, do we have a duty to acknowledge this? What we are really asking is whether our right to express our political and social views should necessarily come at the expense of political offense or potential offense. And perhaps you may argue that we don't have a duty to care for the offense of others because it is less important. On the other hand, bringing in the involvement of the state, you may argue that there are already minimal enough protections for religious peoples and religious minorities, and for something so fundamental to their identity that it supersedes any conception of the state and the idea of the good life from that state, then perhaps offense should be considered akin to something more damaging. And that is why they may be entitled to a right to not be offended, because it is akin to a right to self-defense. Second, this House believes in the right to secession. So again, we are looking for the core contention here. What are the fundamental rights that are being contested? Is the right to secession a part of the right to vote, in the sense that individual citizens can opt out of that state? Phrasing the question in this way is important because you eventually understand the ops case a bit clearer here. Opposition will contest by saying that the right to secession interferes with the quality of life of others, and therefore their ability to participate in the state because the state is incapacitated when regions secede. So if you were to make an effective inherent gov case by talking about duties in response to opposition, you would frame this debate with respect to the right to freedom. That to be part of a state with no other option than to be part of the same government, its identity, its laws, its way of living, is akin to being imprisoned. And so the right to vote can be portrayed as a fundamental right because of this ability to contest state power in this particular way, which is why the right to secession is more innate than any other right, like the right to quality of life or the right to a better economic situation, which opposition is presuming to be the case in this particular debate. Lastly, this House believes in the right to universal digital anonymity. As you may notice, thinking about these rights debates as fundamental clashes of competing rights makes the debate richer because you already have to defend why these rights exist, and then subsequently interrogate the assumptions that underlie why states acknowledge these in the first place. And so the same would apply here. Government may say that the right to universal digital anonymity is part of self-defense and freedom and protection for individuals to opt out of a pervasive internet infrastructure that collects data from its participants. Whereas opposition may explain that this right may in fact enable these same worst excesses of the internet, which can also cause disproportionate harm to national security and to others. And so when confronted with this clash, it helps to also be concrete with what it means to be free and anonymous online. Why should states be involved in the free market of the internet? Is the internet a public space like other public spaces in real life? Why can we not just let individuals determine for themselves these relationships? Well, it's also because of power that may be disproportionately allocated online as well. That social media giants have too much power over their consumers in the same way that there is power that is exerted in any other rights relationships which involve state mediation, which is why it is necessary for the state to intervene by protecting and acknowledging this right legally. Okay, so what have we learned in this video? Rights debates are about duties. They are about states, and they are about power relationships. They demand an analysis of the hierarchy of rights, not just in a vacuum but against one another, why states should be involved, and about our existing social relations to one another given an evolving and changing world. And note that because debates exist in the generality of cases, the best arguments in this debate are the ones that are most inherent and most particular about what it means to be part of a state that acknowledges any rights relationship in the first place. Alright, that's it for today's video. Thank you and have a great day.